Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something that might, well, initially sound like nothing at all.
Yeah,
Emptiness.
right. But, stick with us.
Yeah, because our sources, they span Eastern and Western philosophy, psychology, even a touch of quantum physics, they show.
Mm.
This concept is actually surprisingly rich and relevant to you.
Absolutely.
Our mission, really, is to unpack these different angles on emptiness and maybe highlight why understanding them might just shift your perspective a bit.
Exactly. When you hear emptiness, maybe a sense of void comes to mind, lack.
Sure, that's common.
But as we explore, you'll see that's just one part of a much more complex idea. Maybe we should start by looking eastward.
Okay, sounds good. So let's dive into the Buddhist idea of shunyata. It's not about everything just being zero, is it?
No, not at all.
There's more to it than simple non-existence.
Yes, precisely. Shunyata points to the lack of inherent, unchanging nature in things. It's
Yeah.
subtle.
Okay, inherent nature. Like what?
Well, think about, say, your favorite coffee mug. Seems solid, independent, right?
Yeah, pretty solid.
But its existence depends on so much. The clay, the person who made it, the kiln, the designer, a whole web of interconnected factors.
Ah, okay, I see. So it's not inherently just a mug on its own.
Exactly. Hunyata highlights this interdependence and, crucially, constant change, impermanence.
Impermanence, right.
And grasping this lack of a fixed self or fixed nature in things can actually be, well, liberating.
Liberating how?
It encourages you to release attachments to things, ideas, even feelings you thought were solid and permanent, My understanding that even your emotions are constantly shifting change how you react to life's ups and downs.
That's a fascinating way to look at it.
Okay.
It makes you think. Now, Taoism also explores emptiness with Zhu. How does that compare?
Right. Kuz, what's really striking there is the emphasis on emptiness as pure potential.
Potential.
Yeah. The Tao Te Ching uses that famous image of a bowl or a vessel.
Oh, yeah, the empty space inside is what makes it useful.
Exactly. Su is seen as the fundamental source, the non-being that allows being to be. It's like this fertile void where anything can happen.
Okay, so that's very different from how the West often sees emptiness.
Definitely. It contrasts sharply with that more common Western association of emptiness with, negativity, meaninglessness, lack.
Absolutely. In the West, at least initially, emptiness often carried that heavy sense of absence, loss, maybe a lack of meaning. But then you get existentialism. Thinkers like Sartre, they talked about this feeling of angst, like a deep unease facing a seemingly meaningless universe.
Yes, that angst or nausea. But if we connect this, existentialism, while it totally acknowledges that initial encounter with emptiness, that feeling that there's no pre-written script for your life, it doesn't just stop there.
It doesn't just stay negative.
No. Instead, this lack of inherent meaning becomes, well, radical freedom.
Freedom.
Because there's no built-in purpose, you, the individual, have the power, and maybe the burden, to create your own values, to define what your existence actually means. The void becomes a space for self-creation.
Wow, okay. That's a powerful flip. But then there's also nihilism, which takes a much, much darker view of this absence.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Nihilism basically interprets this lack as purely negative, just a void. It often leads to rejecting all purpose, all values, maybe even the possibility of knowing anything for sure.
So the complete opposite of potential.
Pretty much. It's the starkest contrast to that Eastern idea of potential within emptiness, or even the existentialist freedom.
Right. So we've looked at these big philosophical ideas. How does this concept of emptiness actually play out in our modern lives? Like psychologically?
That's a really important question for everyone listening, isn't it? In psychology, feelings of emptiness are often linked to difficult states, loneliness, alienation, a lack of purpose. We see that clinically.
Yeah, that makes sense.
However, some therapeutic approaches are quite interesting here. They actually guide individuals to see this inner emptiness not just as a void to be feared or filled immediately, but maybe as a space for genuine self-discovery, for transformation.
So like pausing in that feeling instead of running from it.
Kind of, yeah. A pause, a moment of stillness in that emptiness can sometimes reveal surprising insights about yourself, what you truly value, what you want to build.
That's a really interesting reframe. Okay, and then surprisingly perhaps, our sources even touch on physics. Apparently empty space isn't really empty.
Well, not according to quantum physics, no. It seems what we perceive as just empty space is actually a field brimming with potential energy.
Potential energy.
Yeah, where these things called virtual particles are constantly popping into and out of existence. It's incredibly dynamic down there.
Huh. So that's another way to see emptiness not as just nothing.
Exactly. Not as a simple void, but as a dynamic source of possibility, even at the most fundamental level of reality.
Okay, wow. So to try and bring this all together for you listening, it sounds like emptiness isn't just one single thing at all.
Not monolithic, no.
It can feel like a negative void, absolutely.
Uh-huh.
But it can also be seen as this fertile ground for potential, whether that's the Buddhist idea of no fixed self leading to liberation, or the Taoist source of all being, or the existentialist freedom to create meaning, or even this quantum field buzzing with possibility.
Precisely. I think the key takeaway for you is that the meaning of emptiness isn't fixed. Its interpretation shifts dramatically depending on the perspective you take. It depends on the lens you're looking through.
So here's maybe a final thought for you to consider. How might your own perspective shift if you started to think about emptiness, not just as a lack, but maybe as, well, as either that absence of a fixed, unchanging self, like Sunyata suggests, or as a field of pure potentiality?
It's definitely something worth mulling over.
Yeah, certainly something to think about. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.